Sandbags. Did you work that this morning? It's okay. So Lucas is just to cover it.
Yeah.
No. What happened? He sneezed at school, so I've got sick.
He what? Sneezed. Oh no.
It's
Terrible.
funny
What
now,
did
someone
you say?
sneezes at work and they're like, sorry, I'm okay, sorry.
I know.
People still have to sneeze.
They do. All right.
If you do question, can you sneeze with your eyes open?
I'm pretty sure it's physically impossible, isn't it?
Yeah.
No, it's not.
Maybe
His eyeballs might fall out.
That's why they can.
Potentially. All right. Guys, welcome to session 3. We are officially past halfway. So 4 sessions to go, and we're probably going to spend 2 or 3 of them on the core. Okay, so really, really, really important. Who knows what makes up the core?
Lower back.
Yeah.
And abdomen.
Anything else?
Yep.
Everything all the way through.
Sorry?
It's all that number of mid.
Yeah, pelvic floor and stuff.
Floor.
Diaphragm, all of it. So again, pretty much anything that isn't a limb. So it's not an arm or leg or your head. Then it's probably your core. Okay, but mostly sort of from here to here, and we would include the hips in that, but we did focus on the hips last week. So we won't worry too much about that today. The core is super, super duper important for life. Okay, so if we don't have good stability through the core, we do a poor job of protecting our internal organs, obviously vital for functioning. We also put ourselves at risk of problems with the spine, and the spine protects the spinal cord, which runs in a tunnel behind the pointy bits, in front of the main chunky bits of the bone. It's a canal that goes all the way through with the spinal cord, and that's important for making sure that you can move your arms and legs, and you can feel things, and you can breathe and maintain your organs, all of that. So basically, without good core, you die. Maybe over-exaggerating a little bit, but it's really, really, really important. And there are a lot of components, which we're about to go into. We touched briefly on what goes into it, but we're going to look a bit more closely here, Ryan. All right. They're just pictures. All right, so we'll start with the bony structures of the core, mainly pelvis. That's your foundation right at the bottom. We have pelvic bones, we have ligaments protecting all the joints that run through the pelvis, and then we have sheets of muscle at the bottom forming the pelvic floor. We also have the spine, as you can imagine, most of the way up. I would probably cut off the core function about here, so upper back kind of region. You'll also have the ribs coming around through off the thoracic spine, so from here to here, we have ribs coming all the way around and sternum at the front. We also have a whole bunch of muscles. Starting with the rib cage, if we're looking at the top here, we're looking here at the diaphragm muscle. So as you can see, and it's a little bit hard from this angle to see, there'll be other pictures coming up, but the diaphragm actually comes up and in, and it's sort of a dome shape on each side. And it comes up higher than you might think. So even looking at this picture, can you all point on yourselves where you think the diaphragm is?
Comes up by anything.
The thoracic diaphragm. Yeah, so you're all pretty spot on. You're getting the apex of the diaphragm here where it comes up. But if you can stick your fingers down and find your very bottom ribs on the side, which is most of the way down to your pelvis, the diaphragm goes all the way down there as well. Okay, so it arches from the bottom of your bottom rib all the way up to the bony part of the bottom of your sternum. Okay, what you can see on the diagram here is you've got some pink and you've got some blue. The diaphragm is going to sit just below the blue part there. And when you take a breath in, what happens is the diaphragm will contract, the muscles will get tighter. Diaphragm contracts and descends further down into the abdominal cavity. That pulls on the blue, which is a space, and that pulls your lungs open so that the air can rush in. Okay, so the diaphragm's first main job is breathing. The other main job, which we'll touch on a little bit further in a minute, is it's actually the roof of our core canister. So bear that in mind, diaphragm roof. I'm going to put that down and we'll build this picture as we go. Right. Next one down, abdominals, which we all pretty much can identify as being part of the core. What you may not realize is how many layers there are and what different jobs they do. So if we start from the outside and work our way in, we've got the external obliques, and you can see the fibers run from the ribs forward down to the front of the hips. So if you were sliding your hands into your pockets, that's the direction that the fibers go, the external obliques. So if they were contracting and shortening, what they'll do, they'll start to twist you when they shorten. Okay, we cut them away, take them off, and go down to the next layer. We've got our internal obliques, which again, big sheet of muscle, but this time the fibers are running in the opposite direction. So if you were going across your body like that, that's the direction they'd be running. Okay, so they will support all the way around as well. Then cut that away, go down another layer. We've got transverse abdominis. So you may have heard of people cueing transverse abdominis or TA before, and typically they'll talk about it being down here. So often some people will visualize that the TA is just a thin band of muscle across the hips and the lower tummy. The lower tummy is typically where you will feel it when you're working it, but it's important to be aware that it runs from about here all the way around to the other side, and that has a compressive force. So if you're close enough to the screen, you'll see that the fibers on the transverse abdominis run transversely, they run horizontal. So when you contract them, it's going to bring your abdominal wall closer to your spine. So if you've heard of belly button to spine cue before, that's what they're trying to activate. We might touch on that cue again a little bit later. And then if we take that away as well, we've got rectus abdominis, which is six-pack muscles. They are not sitting deep to this, so we've gone external to internal here, but this is not deeper than that on the front. This is kind of a hashed together kind of picture. So rectus abdominis is on the very front, the muscles that you'll see on someone with a six-pack or a 10-pack, as we often see in here. And then if we're looking at the back here, we've got your QL, your quadratus lumborum, so it's kind of equivalent of that, but on your back. So often if you feel tight or sore after a workout, kind of through here, that's probably what you're feeling, okay? Not pictured on here is all the muscles around the spine, so the core muscles at the back, but we'll get to that. Haven't got a really good picture of the muscles from sort of this perspective, but there's a whole bunch of different muscles. Some of them are long and run from the top of the spine to the bottom. Some of them are really short and will only span 2 or 3 different vertebrae at a time. But what they do is they provide nice compression and hugging around the spine to keep it nice and steady and allow you to move. And we can see if we cut someone in half across the middle and looked down, it's quite bulky. So if you think about the size of the bone, this vertebrae, the pointy bit at the back, that's the pointy bit at the back there. We've got big meaty muscles at the back, at the sides, and at the front of this, which we'll be able to see from inside the abdominal cavity when we look over to the next picture. But important for you guys to realize that as we go all the way around there's always going to be muscle, okay, holding the abdominal contents together. They form the walls of our canister. All the way around. Abdominal organs will all sit in here. That's a bit of fat, blood vessels, but all these are layers of muscle. Some of them are really, really, really strong. So if we're looking at the back of the abdominal wall, so this is the front of the back muscles, we don't get too confused about direction there. You can see you've got your transverse abdominis, so the horizontal fibers coming around. These are actually, believe it or not, your hip flexors. So these big, long sausage-like muscles here, they go from sort of about here, they run through the pelvis, attach down to the front of your hip. Okay, they also form part of your core. Pelvic floor, one of my favorites. That forms the base of our canister. So here we have abs. We won't dive into too much detail on this, but just important for you to know a couple of things. This is if we were to look down from inside your abdominal cavity. You'll see that there are fibers running in all sorts of different directions. So just to orient you, this is the front of your pelvis. This is where you urinate from. This is where you pass feces from. This is your coccyx, so your tailbone, right here. And this picture is actually really helpful because the pelvic floor is not just a muscle connecting one end of a bone to another. It actually runs in a loop around the back of, this is your rectum, so that's where you'll pass feces from. And to keep you from doing that when you don't want to, if that muscle tightens and shortens, it actually will pull forward, okay? That's going to be important to come back to when we're trying to activate the pelvic floor a bit later on. We're all going to have a go at that. But it's important for you to realize that horseshoe shape, because then you can visualize what you're doing when you're trying to activate your pelvic floor. It's not just a lift, it's these fibers drawing together, so hip bone to hip bone, and squishing from back to front to try and compress all your openings together. We'll dive into it a bit closer as we get to it, okay? One thing at a time, we won't overload you, it'll be okay. It'll be okay. This one's just to make you realize that there's not just the muscles and the bones and the fascia and the ligaments. There's a lot going on through the abdominal cavity and through the pelvis. These are all pictures of nerves. There's a lot of nerve input down there. So if you're having trouble with your abdominal wall, your back muscles, your pelvic floor, that's going to impact a whole lot of other things. You can irritate the nerves and you might feel pain in your legs. You might find difficulty functioning in terms of circulatory return, that kind of thing. So it can have wide-ranging effects. It's not just that you might feel like you're going to let yourself when you're working out, or you feel really tired through the abs. Lots of different consequences. We'll come back to that one a little bit later. But we might leave this one up because it's a good visual. Why is this important to know? Does anyone know?
Well, I always think of it like a skeleton. There is no other bones below the ribcage like the pelvis. So it's crazy big. So you need a lot of muscle.
You do need a lot of muscle to support it.
You're fragile up. That's why.
Pretty much. Can you grab me a stack of yoga blocks, please? About this big.
Yeah. Everything else sits on it.
Everything else sits on top of it. Protects the organs.
That's pretty.
It allows you to breathe, yeah.
Allows you to
Keeps you upright.
That's the parameter.
Yeah, that's perfect.
That defines the
Try to do it another way.
cat.
Yeah. So it's really important that we're able to use all these muscles to maintain a particular amount of pressure in our abdominal cavity, which we'll get back to in a second. But we're going to use this as just a bit of a demonstration of why we need all of this to be strong and to be working together in an integrated fashion. if we're not working well through the diaphragm, the abs and the back and the pelvic floor, then they're not going to work together. If they're not working together, we're not going to be able to maintain what we call intra-abdominal pressure. So the amount of air pressure, fluid, everything that's in there, the amount of pressure that's in this cavity, in the canister. There's a couple of things that's important for. A, not crushing your organs. B, not having stuff fall out where it's not meant to. So, for example, if you have increased intra-abdominal pressure, there's high pressure in that canister, the pressure is gonna leak out through any relative weak spots in the wall, okay? So if you're weak through the pelvic floor, you might leak urine, you might leak gas, you might leak feces, you might leak organs sometimes. It's what we call a pelvic organ prolapse. They're not gonna fall out completely, but they will protrude out where they're not meant to, and it'll be really uncomfortable. Similar to a hernia, yeah. You might get an abdominal hernia, you might get an inguinal hernia. Most common is you leak pressure through the discs in your back. So often the discs, the little shock absorbers in between bones, are a relative weak spot in this canister. So if you're not managing pressure well through here, you're going to leak pressure and it's going to cause all sorts of problems. The other reason that the amount of pressure is important, because this pressure hugs the stack. So maybe we'll take a couple off there. And Dudley, with your nice long arms, can you come and hug these together? Yes. Cool. So with Dudley hugging those together and maintaining nice intra-abdominal pressure on our spinal column here and just casually flexing, this is hard to disrupt and knock over. Okay, you can sit down again. Thanks, Dudley. We haven't got a great amount of pressure on that. It doesn't take much. Now your spine's not going to collapse like that. There's a lot of ligaments, there's everything holding it together, okay? But the point is we're going to disrupt its function. It's not going to crumble like that, all right? Being a little bit dramatic there. But you are going to get injuries through there if you're not maintaining the pressure and the support through there. So there's a couple of ways we can protect the spine. We can manage our pressure through creating stiffness or through creating dynamic stability. When we create stiffness, what happens is we don't move very far. We just stop moving, we stiffen up, okay? Or we could brace through the abdominals. That's a good way as well. Or, as most people do if they're trying to attempt something that's too hard for them, to protect their spine, they're going to fix the diaphragm. They're going to hold their breath. So if you're doing something that's too hard and you hold your breath, that's one way to know that you're about to lose control of your intra-abdominal pressure. Does everyone understand the concept of pressure? Yes. Yeah? Awesome. All right. So what we're going to look at is how to maintain this canister really well. And what will commonly happen in workouts or anything requiring physical effort. Where's my blue one? Yeah, that's right. Thank you. Is we might not have our canister aligned like that. If we're setting up and we've got the diaphragm, is that visible? Yeah, maybe not orange. Let's do black. We're setting up for a workout and we've got poor spinal position. We might be not really well aligned. Okay, we might create a bit of a kink, and that's going to happen if you find yourself with a sway back, sticking your back out like that. What you're then doing is stretching the muscles at the front and kinking the muscles at the back. That's going to create a relative weak spot through the front, and you're going to lose pressure through the front. Okay. What can also happen is people sometimes stick their rib cages forward. That's going to then pull up on the abdominal. So that's going to be lengthened. The back's going to be shortened. And the diaphragm is going to be at a mechanical disadvantage. Okay? Then we've got a bigger space in here. same amount of pressure in a bigger space is going to become less pressure, less hugging on the spine. Okay? There's all sorts of different positional faults that are going to lead to you not being able to maintain this pressure, not being able to protect your spine. Okay? And organs. Very important.
Someone's got a question.
Oh, hello.
I'm use words. So, you know how you were saying that you can sometimes like you can like bleeding or something like that.
Yeah.
Is that if you do jump in movements, is that also causing like the pressure to change, and that's why?
Yeah, definitely. So when you have impact, you add in impact. What you're doing is you're creating more intra-abdominal pressure. And so ideally, when we have activities that cause raised intra-abdominal pressure, so coughing, jumping, sneezing, running, that sort of thing, double unders in particular, or lifting really heavy weights, the body needs to be able to reinforce the muscles to accommodate that pressure. And if everything expands just a little bit, stays the same shape, and is able to maintain tension because you've got strength in those muscles, then you can manage your intra-abdominal pressure. If you don't have the strength and the mobility to expand everything equally and maintain and manage your intra-abdominal pressure, then the intra-abdominal pressure is going to rise more than what we call the closing pressure around the urethra. So if we take that example, if we just digress slightly. Actually, I'm going to put it in some place here. If we're thinking particularly about, like what you mentioned there, Jacinta, about leaking urine, we've got the bladder sitting at the bottom of this stack of organs. What can happen is that the pressure in this cavity, if that increases and we're not able to expand our muscles or equally manage pressure, there's so much pressure coming down that is not matched by the strength of the pressure that's squeezing the neck of the bladder shut, so the urethral sphincter and the pelvic floor is not able to maintain enough tension here to overcome the increased pressure here, and then you leak. And that's similar concept to, say, lifting heavy, increasing your intra-abdominal pressure, and having had a recent back injury, something like that. If you've got a relative weak spot at the back of one of your discs and the tension there is not strong enough to overcome the pressure, that's where it's going to leak. Okay? Any questions on that before we move on? No, cool. All right, so we're going to jump into a little bit of a practical before we continue with some more theory. We want to learn to align our canisters. Okay, so a lot of you will already find that your canister is not nicely lined up like that, maybe because your pelvis is tilted under or tilted forwards, or because your rib cage is tucked under or flaring out, as is more often the case. Or you just don't have the postural awareness or muscle control to be able to line up your rib cage nicely over the opening of your pelvis and getting a nice canister going here. All right, so the first exercise that we're going to try today, and it's really good that we've got a slightly smaller group today, is we'll have all seen a cat-cow before, but we're going to try and break it down into its components. Okay, so yeah, see me there, beautiful. All right, so first part is shoulder blades coming together and apart. Second part, we're going to do 3 or 4 there. Second part is the mid-back moving up and down. Third part is the pelvis. Anterior, posterior pelvic tilt there. If you're able to separately perform each of those movements, when you're then standing up and you find yourself with an unstacked canister, you can just do the one part of it that you need to straighten up. Often what we'll see is people not with a straight canister will say, okay, you need to pull your ribs in. But to do that, they'll then do a whole bunch of other movements as well and not be able to separate them. They'll still have a crooked canister. It'll just be a different kind of crooked canister. Then we're not getting anywhere in terms of being able to manage pressure and set up the muscles on the front, back, top, sides to be in their optimal length tension relationship so that we can manage our pressure. Does that all make sense, roughly? Awesome. All right. Jump down on your hands and knees and give it a try. Just have a play with it. Do 3 with your shoulder blades, 3 with your mid-back, 3 with your pelvis. See how you go.
Shoulders neutral when you do the mid-back.
Yeah, shoulders neutral. Yep, return to neutral with each component before you move on to the next.
My body doesn't want to do it back.
I'm like,
I feel like
I
I'm
want to
just
move my
doing
pelvis.
Yeah.
Me too.
There'll be a tiny bit, but try and, yeah. And I think the key will be making the movement much smaller than you normally would do a cat-cow, because we're not aiming here for spinal mobility, we're aiming for canister alignment. Do your shoulders blades to 3?
Yeah, see, I can't separate.
Yeah, keep playing with it. Yeah, good, Dudley.
I think I
That's
can
the
get it.
mid-back part.
Do it up.
Go down.
Okay, down. I just let gravity.
I've had a lot of practice. I've been teaching people this for years.
Like under here.
Yeah, so think about your rib, for the mid-back, sometimes it's easy to think about your rib cage kind of like a bell and you're ringing it forwards and backwards.
I feel like I just use my pelvis.
Yeah, try not to.
How do you not? Yeah, I'll put down. I can't do that. I feel like I move everything.
Your pelvis is looking good there.
It doesn't go, it doesn't
Yeah.
separate.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
So bring can separate, it's not always on command. That's how you go.
It'll be the same cold with the door shut. The door open, just throw it out there.
And no one is
No,
actually think it's.
Then there's no through air. So, sorry.
Yeah, that's pelvis.
My shoulder. In her mind, it will be warm.
So you're saying that we can turn, we can close the gate. Close the doors and
For the mid-back.
No, you want to open that door and turn the fan on.
More or less.
And
yeah.
then what?
Okay.
Yeah,
That's the mid-back, Kayla. That's
We sell hand warmers, Virginia.
Or you trying your best there? Yeah, yeah.
Put your hands on your back
Junior,
cheeks,
I
that's the
thought,
fastest way to
I
do it.
thought I'd pack tights and I packed shorts.
Nice.
So,
I was thinking about you.
wait,
Not bad, oh my God.
You jump
I've got
on
other-
legs through the arms.
Alex, did you
well, I was thinking
breathe?
of putting my jeans back on.
Always breathe,
Rest in
just breathe.
part of this,
Yeah, in the background.
especially in the mid-back, like breathing, it feels like you get more range.
Yeah.
Can we do crazy cats?
I think it's. I'm moving and then I realized
That's right, these are loose.
I'll just not do
Yeah,
one.
but if you're doing your middle back.
It's like this is how I look when I eat a big meal sitting up.
Yeah.
Okay, so like,
I don't think I can do any part separate except for the pelvis.
it's like your pelvis.
Can you do shoulder
Pinch the shoulder blades together.
But your back's moving too.
Physically.
Physically, it has to a little bit.
Pelvis. Pelvis.
Everyone's on these.
Mid-back, fine.
Is this right then?
Yeah.
I mean, like.
I don't understand how this made back to legs. I think I need to.
I'm trying to like calm myself up and watch her. My pelvis just moved.
I finished on the floor.
Doesn't want to knock.
I was like, I'm going to get 2 rounds. It's not on myself. Elvis, don't read it.
I just can't do the back.
Okay. Yeah.
Not the crazy cat.
The crazy cats.
That was
We
very
had it,
interesting.
it's so
Did you know that, have you seen him doing
Crazy
The
cats.
crazy cat, but.
That's not some of my only fans.
I'll pay $5 right now.
I don't need your money. I take it out of your bank account on a daily
A
basis.
little bit, that's okay. Right, cheers, look great. You do believe.
Question
How do you laugh at this?
Right,
That's fine.
serious now, right?
That's where
Come
he's
down.
at.
Yeah.
It's not my public floor, it's my mouth.
Oh, yeah. Go on, hold it.
Yeah.
Try harder.
Yeah, that one's easy.
I want
Mid back
to-
very stiff, and that will be
Yeah,
covered
but
in
I-
mobility on Tuesday. All right. Not bad. Overall, not bad. You all kind of got it in the end. Some of your movements are a bit bigger than others, and some of you will have really good control, perhaps through the pelvis, and not so good through the mid back or the shoulders, and others different bits and pieces. That's a really good one to practice. A good sequence to practice at home is go 3, 3, 3, just so that you get used to modifying your position. Because when you then get under a barbell later on, you're adding more and more compressive load. And eventually, if you're not managing, yeah, we don't want that. Okay, so to avoid wetting yourself, you A, need to control your abdominal pressure, and B, you need a strong pelvic floor. C, it needs to be well coordinated with the rest of your core. Okay, so I could spend whole days talking about a pelvic floor, but
I have a question.
Yeah.
Feel free to just not answer if you can do it later. With the peeing yourself then.
I feel like it's a problem for me. Yeah, go on.
With jumping especially, I'm thinking that you shouldn't have to think about creating the pressure while you do the jump because it's such a quick movement.
Yes,
And so are you going to is that coming up? Or is that,
it's not coming up today, but it is coming up.
let's leave it till the end.
We might touch on that. It can be more of a female thing than a male thing for a couple of reasons.
We could just put a peg on it though, so it's way
Oh,
easier.
I've seen those.
Hey. Come on, we're on a timeline here. Females, they tend to have their openings further round to the middle as opposed to males having further forwards. And actually, this is a really good one. Women tend to sit a little bit more forward tilted through their pelvis. So if you think about this, being neutral, forward tilt, backwards tilt. If you look straight down, I love this picture, and you're sitting in neutral, here we go, and then you're looking straight down, a lot of the direct vertical force, if you're jumping, is going through the spine, which is really strong. If you're tilted posteriorly, tilted under, you've got your bottom tucked, which is cued sometimes, but we will touch on that later, that's controversial. Then you can see you've got a really big opening here. Okay, and if you've got a really big opening, then all the force that's vertical is going through, you can pass this pelvis around, this thin sheet of muscles at the bottom. Okay, if we're constantly loading them and not taking the load off anywhere else, like putting it through the bones, which is designed for vertical load, then you're constantly going to be loading that. It's going to get tired and it's going to give up, and then it's going to open up your bladder. It's going to leak.
I don't weigh myself just for the.
Pass it around. We're going to do specifics of the pelvic floor probably next Friday. All right.
But it's funny that everyone has a peeing yourself question.
Oh, always. And at some point in your life, most people will. Coming back to the men versus women thing, women typically have more estrogen, which will make their ligaments and muscles a little bit more pliable, a little bit more flexible, so it's harder for them to generate tension in their muscles, particularly around times of hormonal flux. whether it's due to the menstrual period or due to menopause, due to pregnancy, postpartum, breastfeeding, all of that. Men are on a 24-hour cycle, much easier to train around. Other thing is men will typically leak wind or shark themselves before they wet themselves. Whereas women, just because of the way things are oriented, the pressure is more going to come through at the urinary leakage instead. Now, the other reason that generating tension, moving on from that, other reason that generating tension through the core is super duper important is because that allows us to transfer force from our legs to our arms. And so a lot of our complex movements, like your push press, any of your Olympic lifts, that kind of thing, you need to be able to transfer a large amount of force from your legs, generating a powerhouse, to your arms and then into the bar. Okay, I don't know how many, well, everyone should hopefully have passed year 8 science. Fingers crossed.
People glaze over last.
It's too long ago.
Too long ago. Some of you will probably remember doing up simple circuits for lights.
I don't think I did this science.
University.
Well, actually, no, I can do this.
So this is a light circuit, right? And this is when the lights are in series. And if the circuit is fully closed, i.e. the switch is on, then you get light in both bulbs. And for the purposes of this demonstration, these are your legs, lower limbs, these are your arms, upper limbs, okay? So if we don't have the core on, the switch is off or open, circuit's open, and then you can't get light from here to here because there's a break in the circuit. Same thing happens when you don't have the core to generate, to act as a bridge between your lower limbs and your upper limbs to transfer force. Okay, if you haven't got good stability through the core, then all the force is going to be lost here and you're going to have to generate a whole bunch of force through your arms. And so your ability to progress with that exercise is going to be severely limited. Or you're going to injure yourself. Either way. Cool. All right. So we've looked at alignment. We're probably going to leave strength for Tuesday's session because it's a little bit easier to do without correction. And we're going to go into breathing. So being able to breathe well is how you're going to coordinate your diaphragm with your pelvic floor. And that's where a lot of your pressure regulation happens. As we walk around, we don't see big excursions through the back or through the abs. Unless we talk about belly breathing, which is often cued in yoga and that sort of thing, which can be a really good thing. But if you're cued to belly breathe, just make sure that it's not just your belly that you're expanding. Make sure you're expanding 360 degrees all the way around you, down to the pelvis, out through the abdominal wall, out through the back wall as well. Otherwise, you're going to continually stretch the belly, similar to the effects that happen in pregnancy. Then you're going to create a relative weak spot at the front, and that's where you're going to lose your pressure. Okay, so for breathing, let's have a lie on your side. Pop your hands on your ribs so that you've got a nice grip with your thumb at the back. Thumb is on the back of the ribs. Top 2 fingers are on the bottom of the ribs, and then your bottom 2 fingers are on your tummy. So you should have your pistol grip around your ribs, and then bottom 2 fingers on your belly. Okay. From there, you should now be able to feel yourself as you breathe expand sideways, backwards, and forwards. Okay, so you'll be expanding forwards into your fingers, sideways into the webbing of your hand, and backwards into your thumb as you take a nice deep breath in. Feel that? Cool. What you can also hopefully feel if you zone out a little bit, maybe rest your head on your hand, close your eyes and really think about where your pressure is going, because obviously the air itself will be contained in the lungs, but the pressure will be transferred down into the abdominal cavity. You want to feel that expanding into the pelvic floor. It's not going to move a huge amount, but as the diaphragm comes down, so should the pelvic floor, so that that relative pressure in the abdominal cavity stays the same. Is anyone having trouble feeling the pelvic floor expand? body of pressure is coming into your tummy. So I want you to actually turn over, get into a child's pose, so your knees are up against your tummy. So like this. Cool. And now just breathe into it. Don't feel rushed. You get a good sideways expansion there. Try and relax down into the upper cavity. Do better. That was really good. What will often happen if you've been working out hard, or if you're running around from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, and you're really busy, you're going to tighten up through the pelvis and through the abs, and you're going to start shallow breathing. So you're going to only let your air come into your ribs, or even worse, into your shoulders. You're not going to expand down here at all. So really good to take some time to breathe either on your side, or if you're having trouble on your side, come into child's pose. So get back on camera. Come into child's pose so that your thighs are actually blocking your belly from expanding and forcing the air into your back and into your lower pelvis. So you can pop your hands on your lower back there. You have something to rest your head onto, and breathe into your hands, feel them expand. So from a sensory perspective, you may not feel the pelvic floor, you may not have great awareness of it because you don't think about it often, you don't work on it, but your hands are full of sensation. So you might feel a little bit of expansion into your hands down at your very lower back, and then you know it's happening, and then you'll develop that awareness over time. All right. Did anyone else have trouble getting the air all the way down?
I can get it down, but I can get it behind.
Yeah, okay. So jump into your child's pose. Maybe pop your hands underneath your head just to rest them. Make sure they're nice and relaxed. And start just by breathing here into my hand. Good. Nice and slow. Get a full breath out. You won't get a good breath in unless you get all your air out first. That's it. Good. Good, and again. Yeah, really good, really good. So the air's coming down here. I can feel the expansion happening there. So it will be going all the way down into your pelvis. And over time, you'll get a better feeling of that happening. It'll just be a small movement up and down. How's everyone feeling now? Pretty relaxed? Good. So we need to be relaxed. Are you awake going?
Yeah.
Cool. We need to be relaxed for the next part of it. We are actually going to try a TA contraction. So if you remember back to this slide, TA comes all the way around, wraps around you like a corset. And what that's going to do is just start to generate tension most of the way around. So if we think back to canister.
So the weightlifting belt that we wear is like an auxiliary.
Yep. My personal opinion on those is that you probably shouldn't be wearing them to do anything more than sort of a 3 to 5 rep max kind of activity.
Next Thursday.
You should have enough strength through your abdominal wall and your own pressure generating capacity to do lower weights than that. Once you get up into the heavier weights where it's sort of your 3 to 5 rep max or even heavier than that, that's when I would use it as an auxiliary. It's also really helpful for sensory feedback, so that will help you turn on a really good brace. When you're doing an activity that requires you to brace or generate tension through your TA and through the rest of your abdominal wall together, and your core and your pelvic floor and your diaphragm, get everything working together. The activity that you're doing is going to increase your intra-abdominal pressure, and to maintain it, and the extra pressure is going to then push out and try and expand this kind of stuff. And so the role of your muscles is to fight that tension and hold it steady. This may change size a little bit to keep the pressure under control. Does that make sense? So you're going to learn to practice the TA. The easiest place to feel it is sort of just in here, just inside your hip bones, because that's where it has the least, that's sort of the thinnest spot where it has the least number of other muscles lying on top of it. So if you're maintaining your relaxed state, have a lie on your back, maybe bend up your knees. And get your deep breathing going again, really expanding down into the sides and the back and the pelvis. Couple of good breaths. And then on your next out breath, you should just sort of imagine that you're drawing your hip bones towards each other. As you do that, you should feel the abdominal wall press down towards your back a little bit. The whole lot together, not just your belly button. You're going to hold it for a second or two and then take a nice deep breath in and relax those muscles again. Have another couple of breaths, and then on another out breath, try it again. You really to try to go about 50%. Take a deep breath first. You're actually so hard through there and through your upper abs that it's sort of losing the coordination of it, and you're actually getting more tension. So you take a deep breath in, expand everything together like that, and instead of gripping just like really light. Now you're still getting TA, it'll be a bit more subtle, but you don't get this. There you go. Also, probably a little bit too hard. Okay, well then whatever you were doing before, go for like 5% of that. Yeah, that was really good. Really good. Awesome. If you grip much harder than a really gentle one, you're going to then be recruiting everything else, all your other abdominal muscles, which we don't want to discipline. Yeah, there. Right there. No, you're sort of bearing down a little bit there. So just forget about the contraction at all. Just do a couple of nice breaths.
Thank you, Jesus.
Right.
Breathe out your tongue. Wow. A bit of heart.
jack pull the bed, but edge the bed off, and that's it, just under the side of the bed, and it's different. And it's like a fully practice though, like you need. No. You need, it's like,
Not bad, but try to
it really hurts. I don't think I've worked like I said to I was like 2 months. I very much works. Yeah.
It's TBA.
Not bad. What did you say to your brother?
Yeah, you can pulse it on. You want to be able to turn it on gradually, hold it, turn it off.
So turn it off is when you.
Relax. Yeah.
Be calm.
No.
Being calm is good for your immune system. Separate.
Stop.
Can you hold that and breathe?
Why are you smoking, Ryan?
Yeah, good. Well done. Next
That's my resting smell.
Okay. Take a deep breath.
You coaching her or for it? Well, there isn't one. I just want
I didn't know how to isolate it.
to. Cut it all together. Here you go.
Put a bigger one. Do we want to pay?
We paid that last week. Yeah, for 6. And I went in the other day.
That's what you were trying to do. Yeah. Yeah.
Make it a little calm.
I was just gonna do this. Just try and relax it.
Should I say W? Oh, Jesus.
Very close to that.
I'll just like that. And I'll do When do we just start? No, 85. Sounds different. It's like exams. I just got these installments. Yeah, I know, but I just forgot for a second. Okay.
I think it's exams.
So I'm double TWP.
What do they do?
I'm gonna keep trying, but like yesterday was being. And then I replied. I literally messaged after I come to email and I said, how many days? You need to write it. I literally said my report.
Yeah. Try not to blow out. Alright. So guys, we'll just about call it a night there, but just wrapping up, I want to run you over a couple of the common compensations that I'll see. So one of the most common compensations there is you start to turn on through there and then you grip down through your upper abs, almost like you're about to do a sit-up. The reason we don't want that is then we're generating pressure from the top of the canister and pushing it down, putting more pressure down through the pelvic floor and the lower abs, which is making it harder for this muscle to then fight and turn on. The other one is not relaxing completely. So for a muscle to contract, we have to have it in its relaxed state first. So making sure that you're not gripping through here, you get a good breath in and a good breath out to prepare, and then breathing in, expanding, breathing out, contracting. Once you get better at it, I would get you doing some drills like turning it on and then being able to still get a full breath in and out all the way down to your pelvis while you're maintaining that tension. Next breath in, relaxing it. But most of you are struggling to get that 360 expansion and breath all the way down to the pelvis without adding in that contraction yet. So if that's you, I want you to just practice making sure that as you're breathing in, everything's expanding together. As you're breathing out, everything's contracting together. It's what we often also see when people try and do this exercise, turning on through the lower tummy, is that they'll breathe in and out up through their ribs. And so when they breathe in, their stomach goes in, not out. Yeah. That makes sense. So when you breathe in, you're sucking your belly up underneath your ribs. It's what we call a paradoxical breathing pattern.
And that's bad.
That's bad. It's going to get really, really uncoordinated through here, but it's manageable. Okay? Just practice the breathing. Okay. Yeah, it is like a yoga breath. Although sometimes if it's not really well taught, your yoga breath will just focus on expanding through the front. So make sure that whenever you're cued to expand through the belly in the front, you're also knowing, because you're being here, to expand through the pelvic floor and the back as well. So it's a really 360-degree breath. Okay. Any other questions about that TA activation? I'll get back to that in a sec.
Just more from like a teaching point of view, if we were like cueing people in class, is there a simple, like, if we don't have that time to go through each person, is there a simple way that you recommend to cue people on how to activate the TA?
Perfect world. Okay. Refer out. Yeah, but people are going to keep coming to the gym and doing it incorrectly in the meantime, which is not ideal for pressure down on the pelvic floor or the back.
And then they're going to wait.
Yeah, exactly. Then you have them on the floor, which no one wants, you know. Yes, do refer out if there's a problem. Basically, I would just get them to do a belly breath. So a 360-degree breath with their hand on the tummy, and then get them just to exaggerate as the breath goes in, the belly will come out. As you breathe out, the belly will sink, and just get them to exaggerate that sinking a little bit, and that will generate tension through there. That's the easiest way to do it. Or imagine that your hip bones are got really strong magnets on them and drawing them together. I like to cue it with the breath better because then you know you're getting coordination with the diaphragm and the pelvic floor as well, and it's more likely through that co-contraction to activate well. Whereas if you just cue sometimes people will cue belly button to spine or the hips magnetized together. people suck in or fold through the upper abs instead of just tightening through the front lower abdominal wall. So I would cue it as an exaggerating of the breath out, but not making sure it's such a forceful breath out that you go, and curl. Yeah. Don't punch them in the stomach. Maybe a little poke. A little poke. Yeah. Reps and sets. It's a skill-based thing more so than a strength-based thing. So the more often the better. 5 or 6 sets of it throughout the day in 4 or 5 at a time is going to be better quality practice and laying down those neural pathways than doing sort of 3 sets of 10 or like that. Cool. Any other questions?
How can we find our previous ones? Because I have trouble with that.
Previous ones are these.
Yeah,
There was an email sent out at the start of this that's got a link to a Google Doc in it.
I found the master link.
The master link sheet has got, will be populated in real time with all the links. So if you've downloaded it and gone back to it, it'll be missing the later ones. But if you open it in real time from your email attachment, it'll have been updated with all the links to these YouTube lives.
Because I couldn't remember like this the links, like there's nothing.
Yeah. So if you've already downloaded it, that's why it'll be missing.
Okay.
Yeah, cool. So what we're going to do on Tuesday is we're going to run through a bunch of mobilizations for things that will often make you struggle with the cow 333 to align, and the top mobility restrictions that will stop you getting that nice 360 breathing pattern. So we're going to mobilize ribs, we're going to mobilize shoulders and upper back, thoracic extension. What else are we going to do? We're going to practice some pelvic tilting. We're going to stretch through the lower back. And practice the retraction movement through the shoulders in terms of accessory muscle programming so that you can get your canister in nice alignment and get that 360 breath, because without that, any of the other work that you do through your core is going to be wasted or counterproductive, because you're just going to be directing pressure to weak spots or creating new weak spots instead of coordinating everything together to be compressive. Cool. Great work, team.
Thank you.
Jesus, warm.
So warm.